It began with the tea. Chamomile, my favorite. Served with a little honey, a wedge of lemon, and Eliza's picture-perfect smile. I sipped it like always. Warm, soothing, familiar. And yet, something was wrong. My tongue tingled. My head buzzed faintly like I'd stood up too quickly. My stomach empty just moments before now churned like it was questioning my choices. I brushed it off. At 68, I'd grown used to little betrayals from my body. A twinge here, a wobble there. Nothing new, nothing alarming. But that night I vomited. Violently, repeatedly. Eliza stood outside the bathroom door and called gently, "Should I call David? Or, are you just a little off from lunch?" Her voice was sweet, her knock even sweeter. But I remember what flashed behind her voice: amusement. Containment. That subtle little tightness around the mouth of someone who's already decided you're imagining it. The next morning she brought me soup. "To settle your stomach," she said, brushing my hair from my forehead like I was a child. "You look so pale, Margaret. Are you sure you're not overexerting yourself?" I nodded, smiled, took the spoon, but I barely touched it. And when she left the room, I quietly flushed the rest down the sink. That night, I didn't get sick. Now I'm not a woman prone to paranoia. I spent my entire life working among children and books, two of the only things that can't lie to your face. My job as a school librarian required me to read people, not just literature. But no book ever prepared me for Eliza. When David first brought her home, I'll admit I was charmed. She was striking tall, graceful, that impeccable posture that always makes women like me straighten our backs. She spoke with conviction, folded laundry like she'd trained in the military, and knew exactly what to say to everyone at the table. To everyone except me. With me, there was always a shadow behind the light, a hesitation. Looking back, I can't say when things shifted. When I moved into their house after my fall last winter, Eliza welcomed me like a daughter would, but only when David was around. When he wasn't, the warmth drained from her eyes like bathwater down a rusted tub. Still, I tried to believe the best. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was a burden. Old age plays tricks on dignity. We get used to being invisible. But that tea, the way my body rejected it, changed everything. The symptoms started slowly. A headache here, a faint rash on the insides of my arms, nausea that came and went without reason. Eliza was always nearby when it began, with tea, with soup, with her warm, resting eyes watching me from across the room. She never brought food when David was home, only when I was alone. I started keeping a list in my journal. Day 1, vomiting after lemon tea. Day 3, rash after soup. She said it was turmeric. Day 6, didn't eat. Felt fine. Day 7, ate crackers she handed me. DIL. Migraine. By the second week, I had enough circumstantial evidence to scare myself, but not enough to tell anyone. Who would believe me? David adored her. She brought him coffee in bed. She rubbed his shoulders when he walked through the door. She laughed at his jokes that weren't funny. And he, poor, tired David, was so hungry to be adored that he never noticed how her hands lingered on him a second too long when I was watching. He didn't see what I saw. On day 10, I watched her make my tea. She stood in the kitchen, humming softly, her back to me, reaching into a drawer I didn't recognize, a narrow one near the spice rack. She brought me the cup, kissed the rim before handing it to me. "It's good for inflammation," she said. I smiled and pretended to drink. Then I left the room and quietly poured it into the potted fern near the window. That night, the fern was dead. That was the first time I allowed myself to know the truth. Eliza was poisoning me, not with malice, but with patience, with intent. What she didn't know was that I had raised a child through illness. I had spent 30 years studying homeopathy, and before I became a librarian, I nearly completed my nursing degree. I know how the body works. I know how it breaks. I also know how to break it back. The thing about poison is it's never just in the body. It seeps into trust, into memory, into the warm rituals you once found comfort in: a cup of tea, a bowl of soup, a kind voice asking how you slept. It rewrites everything. And suddenly, I was living inside a play where only Eliza knew the ending. I started watching her closely, not just when she was near me, but when she thought I wasn't looking. She hummed a lot when she cooked. Always the same tune. It wasn't a real melody, more like a child's lullaby that didn't resolve. A little off-key. A little too calm. Every evening she brought me food on a special tray. Not one David ever saw. She insisted on plating it herself. To make it feel more like home, she said. And it always did. Too much so. Everything was warm, gentle, fragrant, like she was trying to sedate my suspicion with comfort. But I kept writing. Day 12. Rash spreading. Gums sore. Didn't eat, one cleared by morning. Day 13. Caught her wiping cup before handing it to me. Gloves. Day 15. Replaced soup with my own leftovers. No symptoms. Day 16. She insisted on making tea, even when I declined. That night, I went into the kitchen after everyone was asleep. I opened the drawer she used near the spice rack. And there it was. A small dark blue jar with a handwritten label that read, Stevia. Organic. It wasn't sealed. No branding. No safety tape. I opened it. The scent was faint, sweet, yes, but metallic underneath. Like crushed aspirin. Or worse. I took a spoon and scraped a small amount onto a napkin. Didn't touch it. Just folded it and hid it in the bottom of my jewelry box. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I would take it to someone. But the next morning, the jar was gone. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask where it went. Because Eliza was already watching me too closely. She had that look again, that soft, sweet sadness that said, "Oh, Margaret, you poor paranoid woman." I realized she wasn't afraid I'd discover her. She was confident I wouldn't be believed. And why should I be? I was a widowed mother-in-law living under her son's roof. Old, tired, unsteady. Half of the world expects women like me to be confused anyway. Eliza didn't have to discredit me. She just had to wait for me to wear myself down. When I brought it up to David, he frowned like I'd dropped a glass. You think Eliza's doing what? I softened it. I think she might be using something in the kitchen that's not agreeing with me. He sighed. Mom, we've talked about this. You've had a rough year. The fall. The loss of Dad. You're under stress. I'm not making it up. I know you're not lying, but maybe your body's just reacting more than it used to. More. Not differently. Not dangerously. Just more. Like I was an old wound acting up in the weather. That night, I heard them talking in their bedroom. Their door was cracked slightly. I don't know what to do, David said. She's not eating again. Then Eliza's voice, soft as sugar melting in water. She needs to feel like she's in control. Maybe. Let her cook tomorrow. A pause. Isn't that dangerous? He asked. She won't hurt herself. She just needs to feel useful. Useful. The next morning, I made my own breakfast. Toast, boiled egg, sliced banana. David smiled. Eliza praised me. We're so glad to see you up, Mom, she said. Really, it's a good sign. But when she poured her coffee, she reached for that same drawer again, and it was back. The dark blue jar, labeled Stevia. That's when I knew I wasn't just suspicious. I wasn't just being dramatic. I was right. And being right was the most dangerous thing of all. Because now I had to do something about it. There's a subtle difference between paranoia and perception, and Eliza was counting on me not knowing where that line was. But what she didn't understand is that women like me live between those 2 points. We survive in silence, in subtleties. We listen for tones. We see what people think we're too old or too polite to notice. And what I saw now that I was finally looking terrified me. I began with the routine. Wake early even before Eliza. Not too early, nothing suspicious. I'd pad softly down the stairs, fetch my notebook from beneath the living room cushion, and write with my lap covered by a shawl. Day 18. Woke with splitting headache. Ate nothing yesterday. Drank own tea, no symptoms. Day 19. Watched her dispose of soup, I refused. Did not argue. Smiled too easily. I used her words against her. When she cooed, "How are you feeling this morning?" I said, "Better thanks to you." And I watched her eyes for the flicker of confusion or disappointment. Some days I'd pretend to be sick. Other days I'd pretend to recover miraculously. She liked the sick days best. The day I caught her with the dropper changed everything. It was a simple move on her part, one she must have done 100 times. She thought I'd left the room. She didn't hear me quietly re-enter the kitchen after forgetting my shawl. She stood with her back to me, humming, twisting the little cap from the glass bottle. Clear, liquid, colorless, odorless. She added 3 drops into my tea and stirred it with practiced ease like it was part of a muscle memory. She didn't hesitate, didn't double-check. It was muscle work. I didn't speak. I watched. When she turned and noticed me, I was standing with my hands folded in front of me, smiling like nothing had changed. "Oh, Margaret, I didn't hear you." She set the spoon down quickly. "I thought I'd sweeten the tea for you. You forgot it on the counter again." "Such a thoughtful girl," I said. "You always take such good care of me." She smiled that perfect camera-ready smile, but her hands were slightly too still. I took the tea, thanked her, and retreated. In my bedroom, I poured it into a vial I'd hidden in the drawer beneath my scarves. The liquid looked like water, but it was anything but harmless. That night, I dreamt of my late husband. He was standing in the garden the way he used to, sun hat tilted forward, knees bent in the soil, tending to his foxglove with reverence. "It's a shame," he said in the dream, not turning to face me. "It was never supposed to be her." "Who?" I asked. "You know," he said, "and you'll know what to do." I woke with tears in my eyes and the taste of something bitter in the back of my throat. The next morning, I went to the pharmacy with my sample. They couldn't do anything official without a prescription, a case number, a police report. But the technician behind the counter, a kind young woman named Renee, offered to run a discreet toxicity panel for me, off the record. I nodded, slipped her a 20. "It's probably nothing," I said. But we both knew that wasn't true. 3 days later, she called me from a private number. "I can't tell you exactly what's in it," she said. "But what you gave me shows compounds similar to digitalis, which in trace amounts could mimic a heart condition." Foxglove. My husband had been right, and Eliza had found her weapon. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the receiver until the knuckles went white. The rage didn't come in a flood. It came in a trickle. Slow, steady, and sharp. That afternoon, I prepared lunch. Just for myself. Eliza walked into the kitchen and paused when she saw me stirring soup over the stove. "You're cooking?" she asked, her voice all silk and curiosity. "Just something simple," I said. "I've had an appetite lately." She hovered near the island. "You sure you're up for it?" "The doctor said rest is key." "I'm not a China doll, Eliza. Besides, you've been working so hard. Let me take care of you for once." I turned to her with a warm smile and saw her visibly hesitate. It wasn't a reaction of surprise. It was caution. She didn't like when things changed without her approval. I made 2 bowls, set them out with fresh tea. She didn't touch hers. She poked at it, sipped the edge of the tea but didn't drink. She smiled, said she wasn't very hungry. Stomach ache. I nodded. "You should see someone about that," I said. "Stomach problems can be dangerous." Her eyes locked with mine across the table. I held the gaze longer than usual, long enough to say I know. That evening, she stayed in her room. David came home late and found me reading in the parlor. "She's a bit tired," he said. "Maybe she's caught whatever bug you had." "I'm sure she'll be fine," I replied. But I wasn't sure. And I wasn't sorry. That night, I did something I never thought I would. I returned to the basement, to my husband's tools, his shelves, his tinctures, And there, beside the bottles labeled rosemary and mint and valerian root, was the brown glass vial marked D. purpurea digitalis extract. I took it. Not to use it yet, just to hold it. To know I wasn't defenseless. That I wasn't waiting for someone to end me silently. Eliza didn't serve me tea the next day. She said she was fasting. Said her stomach was bothering her. But I noticed the way she studied me as though recalculating. Like she was trying to figure out if I knew, if I was bluffing, if I had the strength to fight. That was her weakness. She thought I had already lost. She hadn't yet realized that this is the version of me that comes after survival. The one who no longer apologizes. The one who watches her. There are two kinds of silence in a house. The kind that settles like peace, and the kind that hums like something buried beneath the floorboards waiting to be heard. After that lunch, the silence between Eliza and me was deafening. She didn't question my sudden energy. She didn't comment on my new routine, but she watched me. Every movement, every choice, every time I stepped into the kitchen uninvited. She was recalibrating. I could feel it. And I wasn't waiting around to be her next draft of destruction. The next trap came from instinct, and a bit of old-fashioned librarian cunning. You see, when you manage children and unruly teenagers for 30 years, you learn that catching lies isn't about confrontation. It's about quietly setting up the moment where someone catches themselves in the lie and watches you watching them. So I let her think I was settling back into comfort. I wore my soft sweaters again. Watched the news in the mornings like usual. Started gardening again, pulling weeds with gloved hands and humming in the dirt like I didn't know what she was. I didn't avoid her food anymore. But I didn't swallow it either. I developed a simple routine mouth napkin to tea towel to Ziploc to freezer. Every meal became evidence. It was a Thursday morning when I caught her again. I had walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. She was standing at the counter wiping a spoon. It was ordinary, almost boring. But her shoulders were too tight, her back too straight, and when she turned, she jumped. "Didn't hear you come in?" she said. "I thought I'd get a glass of water." She smiled, slow, soft, measured. "Of course." Then I saw her hand. She was holding a small spice tin, the kind you keep on hand for cinnamon or cardamom. But this one was labeled basil. I took it from her casually, held it to the light. She didn't protest, but I watched the breath catch in her throat. I opened it. There was no basil in that tin. Inside was a chalky, light-colored powder, slightly clumped. It didn't smell like anything at all. "That's not basil," I said. She blinked. "Oh," she replied. "I must have reused an old tin for my matcha blend. It's powdered tea. You know how I love my teas." "Of course," I smiled, placed the tin back down. And later that day, when she went out for a walk, I removed it, sealed it in a labeled bag, added it to the drawer beneath my scarves. By now, I had 6 preserved samples, enough to convince someone. If not the police, then a doctor, a toxicologist, or a journalist desperate for something juicy. But still, I waited. Because poison is a slow art, and revenge, I've learned, is best taken sip by sip. That night, I found something else. It was almost by accident. David had forgotten his tablet in the downstairs office. He was already upstairs, too tired to come back down, so I offered to retrieve it. Eliza, of course, insisted on doing it herself. But I insisted harder. She couldn't refuse without seeming rude, so I walked into their shared office. The lights were off, the computer still glowing faintly from sleep mode. As I reached for the tablet, I noticed something else, an open drawer in the corner desk half concealed by a decorative scarf. Inside was a small red notebook. Not one of David's. I picked it up, flipped it open. And for the first time in weeks, I felt real fear. It was a journal, or more accurately, a log. Each page was dated, labeled with symptoms, with doses. 102 TSP added to herbal tea. Subject exhibited fatigue light tremors. Next trial increased to 3.4 TSP observe effect on memory. 3-day withdrawal resulted in marked improvement confirming baseline response. Page after page. My name never appeared. But the subject was clearly me. One page chilled me most of all. Goal: maintain trust without arousing suspicion. Phase 3 should create dependency. Subject must not die prematurely. I nearly dropped it. I stared at the writing, crisp, tidy, emotionless. It wasn't just poison, it was experimentation. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it, returned upstairs with the tablet in hand, sat down in bed next to David. He was watching a show, oblivious, and I stared at the wall thinking, this woman was not just cruel. She was calculated, clinical, detached. I had become a living lab rat in her carefully controlled environment, and nobody had noticed. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I laid awake and thought about the foxglove, about the old remedies my husband once taught me, about how just the right amount of the wrong thing could silence even the most manipulative mouths. But I didn't want Eliza dead. Not yet. Because death was too clean, too easy. I wanted her seen. By David. By anyone she had ever fooled. I wanted her exposed the way I had been vulnerable, powerless, forced to defend her truth to people who didn't believe her. I wanted her to feel the gaslight burn back. So I set a plan in motion. The next morning, I made a pot of tea. From scratch. Chamomile, fennel, lemon balm, all from my husband's old apothecary cabinet. No poison, no additives. Just scent. Familiarity. Comfort. I poured 2 cups, carried them into the living room where Eliza was scrolling her phone. Tea, I asked. She blinked, smiled slow and cautious. You made it, I did. She took it, but I saw her nose wrinkle slightly. It wasn't her blend. She took a sip anyway, out of politeness or suspicion, I couldn't tell. I watched her for the next 30 minutes, and saw nothing, because I hadn't given her anything to react to. But she didn't know that. And not knowing, that's the seed I planted. The game was turning. She just didn't know which side I was playing. The moment you stop reacting the way a predator expects you to, they panic. And Eliza, for all her polish and perfect posture, had a very delicate sense of control. That's why I knew the only way to bring her down wasn't with evidence alone. It was with confusion. She needed to lose her grip on the narrative. The story she'd written about me, that I was fragile, delusional, grateful for her attention, had to unravel thread by thread. So I gave her what she feared most, a version of me she didn't understand. I started cooking again. Not every day. That would have been too obvious, but enough to seem confident, enough to appear healed. I've been craving your father's old recipes, I said to David one morning as I flipped pancakes at the stove. He looked surprised but pleased. Eliza hovered in the hallway, her arms folded, not saying a word. You sure you're up for that? Mom, David asked. You've been resting so much. I feel good, I said. Strong. Eliza stepped in then, smiling faintly. That's wonderful, Margaret. Just don't overdo it. The same soft concern as always. But her eyes. Her eyes were scanning the kitchen like a burglar re-entering a house they'd already robbed. I started leaving cookbooks open on the kitchen counter. Mostly herbal remedy books, old holistic guides, nothing too overt. Just enough to make her wonder. She moved them when she thought I wasn't watching. Replaced them with her clean eating manuals. I let her. Because for every book she moved, I planted something else. A new jar of tea she hadn't approved. A handwritten note about my energy returning. An old photo of me in my nursing uniform just so she'd remember I wasn't always some doddering retiree. This was theater. And Eliza was still playing a script that no longer fit the play. One afternoon, I made shortbread cookies, David's favorite, and left them cooling on the counter when they got home. David took 2, kissed my forehead, and grinned like a boy again. Eliza didn't touch them. She complimented the scent, praised the texture, but she never brought one to her mouth. She was too used to being the one feeding, too rattled by the idea that I might now be feeding her. Which is exactly what I wanted. The next step was riskier. I began to pretend to slip. Not physically, but mentally. I'd forget something in front of her, then recall it a few moments later with precision. I can't find the matches, I'd say as I opened a drawer. I always forget where oh, here they are. I'd walk into a room and stand still for several seconds, then say, "Now what was I coming in for?" and immediately snap my fingers. Ah, my notebook. Little moments. Enough to make her question if I was losing grip or just pretending. She couldn't be sure. That uncertainty kept her watching, kept her guessing. And when predators start guessing, they start slipping. Late one evening, I caught her in my room. She claimed she was looking for a missing charger, but my phone had been fully charged and resting beside me the entire day. I didn't call her out on it. I simply said, "Did you find what you were looking for?" She smiled and said, "Oh yes, just making sure everything's where it should be." I nodded. "And is it?" She hesitated, then said, "Of course." That night, I moved the evidence. Every preserved tea sample, every powdered food container, every napkin tucked away, I relocated them from the freezer and drawer to a locked box beneath the floorboards in my bedroom closet. A hiding place I'd discovered years ago when we first moved in. I kept the journals separate under my pillow, sealed in a Ziploc, pages marked with sticky notes. Because now the trap wasn't about if she'd try again. It was about how I'd catch her when she did. David, sweet David, remained oblivious. He kissed Eliza on the cheek, brought her flowers once a week. He had no idea his wife was slowly erasing me 1 teaspoon at a time. He asked me how I felt, but not because he was worried. Because he thought I was getting better. And in a way I was. Not physically. Not yet. But I was returning to myself. The version of me that Eliza could never quite predict, the woman who'd raised a child alone after burying 2 miscarriages, who stayed up all night writing grants to fund the school library, who nursed her dying husband without help for 3 years. The woman Eliza mistook for weak. One morning, David left for a weekend work retreat. Eliza and I would be alone in the house for 2 full days. It was the first time I'd truly felt cornered, but also the most in control I'd felt in years. She brought me breakfast that first morning. Oatmeal, sliced banana, chia seeds, and honey. She stood in the doorway watching me eat. I took a single bite. "I'm not hungry," I said, setting it down. She tilted her head. "You haven't eaten all morning. I think it's just nerves. Big weekend being alone with you." She smiled, the kind of smile you'd give a cat before dropping it in a box and driving it far from home. "I'll take good care of you," she said. "I'm sure you will," I replied. She left the room. I waited 30 seconds, then took the oatmeal and scraped it into a small container, sealed it, and labeled it, "Day 27, oatmeal, alone in house with Eliza." Then I locked it away. That night, I heard footsteps outside my door. Soft, careful. I turned out the light, slipped from bed, waited. The knob turned slowly and stopped. No one entered, but I heard her whisper, so faint I nearly convinced myself I imagined it. "Don't fight it, Margaret." Then silence, then retreating steps, then the sound of her door gently closing. She thought she'd won. She thought this weekend would be the final dose, the last chapter. But what she didn't know was that the next move belonged to me. And I wasn't writing it with ink. I was writing it in truth. Eliza thought I was folding. She believed I was too weak, too old, too tired to outplay her. But when someone poisons you slowly, they forget your resistance grows quietly in the background. And in that quiet, you learn how to listen, how to time your breath, how to bide. I had let her believe I was adrift. Now it was time to start steering. David called from his retreat that Sunday morning. Eliza stood nearby while I spoke to him, pretending to water the spider plant near the window. Her back was turned, but her ears were tuned to every word. I smiled into the phone. It's been peaceful, really. Eliza's been wonderful as always. A pause. I let it stretch a beat too long. I do feel a little foggy, though, I added. It's probably nothing. Her hand paused at the pot. I saw it. David made a concerned noise. Is it the dizziness again? A little? You sure you don't want me to come back early? I laughed gently. Oh no, sweetheart. You know how important this conference is. Eliza's taking such good care of me. Eliza straightened up. Slowly. I could practically hear her recalculating in real time. All right, David said reluctantly. But please call if it gets worse. I will, I promised. When I hung up, Eliza turned to me with a practiced smile. Feeling foggy again, I met her eyes and smiled back. Must be my memory. Things blur these days. Maybe it's just age. Maybe. But we both knew what it really was. After breakfast, she suggested tea. I declined. Not sharply. Not suspiciously. Just a light wave of the hand. Too hot today for anything warm. She didn't insist, but she made it anyway. Left it on the side table in the living room. Sat down to scroll her phone. I didn't touch the tea. Instead, I asked, "Have you ever heard of digitalis?" She looked up. The smallest flinch there, then gone. Foxglove, I added. The flower. It used to grow in the backyard. My late husband planted it. Eliza shifted on the couch. Can't say I know much about gardening. I always thought it was beautiful. Delicate but dangerous if you weren't careful. People don't realize how quickly something gentle-looking can kill. She laughed softly too quickly. Sounds like a Lifetime movie. I nodded, or a documentary. That night, I retrieved the oatmeal container I'd saved the one from Saturday morning and placed it in a small, insulated lunch bag. I set it on my dresser beside my jewelry box and labeled it in clear marker for David. Do not discard. Read my journal if I'm gone. It was dramatic. But poison makes you consider the possibility that someone may outpace you after all. On Monday, David returned. He was his usual distracted self, bags under his eyes, tie loosened, smelling faintly of hotel soap and exhaustion. He kissed Eliza on the cheek and wrapped me in a hug. You look good, Mom. I smiled. I feel better. Eliza's been a wonderful nurse. She stood behind him beaming, but she didn't know I had begun to thread my story into his ear, not all at once, but drop by drop. That evening, I told him a story. We were washing dishes, just the two of us, a small tradition from when he was a child. I'd scrub, he'd rinse. Now he did both, and I stood beside him, drying the plates. Do you remember when you were little and got food poisoning at the fair? I asked. He laughed. Oh God. That funnel cake. You kept saying the world was spinning. You and Dad stayed up all night with me. I nodded. And the next morning when I gave you tea, you cried. He frowned, amused. I don't remember that. You told me you didn't want anything I touched, that I'd made you worse. His face fell slightly. I didn't blame you. You were just scared. When our bodies betray us, we start blaming the ones closest to us. Why are you bringing this up? I smiled gently. Just thinking about how easy it is to misplace trust, and how important it is to really see who's feeding you. He stared at me, didn't speak. And then Eliza walked in with a dish towel over her shoulder. The moment ended. But the seed was planted. The next morning, I switched the teacups. It was simple. She brought in 2 identical mugs, hibiscus and orange, she claimed, and set mine beside me. I thanked her, and as she turned to adjust the curtains, I swapped the cups. Just as quickly, I sipped from hers. Her back still turned. She turned back just as I was setting the cup down. Good, she asked too fast. Lovely, I replied. Crisp. Sweet. I like this blend. She blinked, stared, then smiled. But I watched her chest rise once sharply, and I knew I had just confirmed something. I spent the next hour watching her, waiting. But nothing happened. No dizziness, no fatigue. My limbs felt steady, my thoughts clear. When she left the house for errands, I poured the remaining tea into a test jar and stored it in the lockbox. I didn't feel different because I'd only taken a sip. She hadn't dosed it that morning, but now she was unsettled. Because now she didn't know which tea I drank. That night she served dinner and didn't eat. She claimed she had a headache. I didn't press. Instead, I made a small request. Eliza, would you mind going through the kitchen with me tomorrow? I want to reorganize the cabinets. She looked up sharply. What for? Just something to keep busy. And I feel better when I clean. She hesitated, then smiled. Of course. Let me pause here for a moment and tell you what I knew, that the kitchen was her domain, her lab, her stage, and the act of letting me into it, even for something mundane, would feel like a trespass. But I didn't need to find anything in the cabinets. I just needed her to know I might. The kitchen is where women like me are often reduced to our usefulness or our obsolescence. And Eliza had claimed this kitchen long ago, every cabinet arranged with precision, every label handwritten in her careful script. Even the spice jars were alphabetized, but not in a way that made sense to anyone but her. It was her sanctuary, her stage, her laboratory. So when I suggested we reorganize it together, I wasn't really asking. I was walking into her church with muddy boots. She tried to smile as we opened the first cabinet. Let's start with the baking supplies. She said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. It's the most cluttered. I nodded. Let her guide me. Let her pull down jars and tins while I handed her clean dish towels to dust them off. We made small talk. She told me about a recipe she wanted to try. Almond flour goji berries raw cacao. I listened. Asked polite questions. Feigned interest. But I was watching. Not her hands, her eyes. Every time I reached for something unfamiliar, her gaze sharpened just slightly. Then I saw it. A plain white tin, no label, tucked behind a row of decorative matcha tins. I reached for it. She turned from the sink a beat too fast. That's just bulk stevia, she said. I use it when I'm baking for your blood sugar. I held it in my hands. It was heavier than the others. Cold. And slightly dented. I nodded, placed it aside. Didn't open it. Not yet. We finished the task. Or rather, she declared we had. Let's not overdo it, she said sweetly, brushing her hands together. We made good progress. I smiled. You're right. I'm tired. She relaxed, but I could see the worry behind her eyes now, just a flicker. She didn't know what I knew, or what I suspected. And that lack of certainty was starting to chew at her. That night, I returned to the kitchen, quiet as a breath. The white tin was back in its place. I took it again, opened it. Inside, a fine powder. Not quite white, not quite gray, odorless. I sealed a sample and added it to my lockbox. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the back panel of the pantry, a spot I remembered from when David was a child, where I used to hide birthday presents and old report cards. Behind it was a slim space. And inside I found a velvet pouch. Dark green. Zippered. I opened it. And the air left my lungs. Inside were 5 small vials. Glass. Stoppered. Carefully labeled in Eliza's handwriting. T1, T2, T3, B1, B2. Each contained a different colored liquid or powder. Some amber, some milky, one pale green. I didn't touch them beyond what was necessary. Just observed. Photographed. Also inside a small black notebook. Not the red one I'd found in the office. A second log. This one was clinical. B2 delayed response. Symptoms consistent with phase 2 fatigue, nausea, mild disorientation. T3 showed stronger reaction. Use sparingly. Combine with sweet base to mask aftertaste. Increase dosage weekly. There was no name attached, but the entries were dated, and they began a week after I moved in. My hands shook. Not with fear, not anymore. With fury. Not just because she had escalated, not because she had played God over my life, but because she had done it so cleanly. No violence, no noise, no drama. Just slow rot. Rot disguised as care. The next day, I set my next trap. I printed the photos I'd taken, folded them into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote David Private on the front in bold ink. Then I placed it beneath his stack of work folders on the hallway table. I made sure Eliza saw me placing it there. She didn't say anything, but she stopped smiling for the rest of the day. That evening, over dinner, I made my move. "Eliza," I said, cutting my baked fish carefully. "Do you remember that honey turmeric tonic you gave me last month?" She looked up startled for a second, then nodded. "Of course." "I think it helped," I said. "My heart rate's been steadier. I've been sleeping better." David looked up. "Really?" I smiled. "She's quite the healer, your wife." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Told you. She's a genius." Eliza laughed lightly, but her grip on the fork tightened, because now she didn't know if I was mocking her or thanking her. And that's exactly where I wanted her. Later that night, I slipped into David's office. The envelope was gone. Not in the folders, not on the desk. Vanished. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't disappointed. It meant she'd seen it, opened it, destroyed it. Which meant she knew I knew, and more importantly, she knew I had proof. What she didn't know was that I'd made 3 more copies. One hidden in the attic crawl space, one slipped inside the lining of my suitcase, and one just for poetic satisfaction mailed to my old friend Diane, a retired nurse with a vindictive streak. Just in case. The next morning, Eliza didn't make breakfast. She sat in the sunroom staring out the window. Silent. Hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug she didn't sip from. I passed her on the way to the kitchen. Paused. Laid a hand on her shoulder. "You seem tired," I said. She didn't look up. "Sometimes it's exhausting, isn't it?" I continued. "Pretending to take care of someone you wish was gone. Still nothing." I leaned closer. "I hope you're not slipping." Then I walked away. There comes a moment in every long game where silence turns into tension. Not the kind you can brush off with polite words or lukewarm smiles, but a thick, sour tension that sticks to the air like old smoke. That's what Eliza brought into the house now. She didn't speak to me unnecessarily. She didn't ask if I wanted tea. She didn't hover in the kitchen or tidy the corners of the room she once controlled with military precision. She just drifted from hallway to living room to sunroom as if her body were here, but her mind was scrambling to find the nearest emergency exit. I let her. David, of course, noticed. But men like him only notice in the vaguest, most unhelpful ways. "She seems tired," he said one night while we cleared the dinner plates. "She is," I replied. "Holding up lies for that long wears on the spine." He laughed, confused. "That's poetic." "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly. "Nothing." But the hook was baited, and my son had always been curious. The following day, I asked David to help me clean out the attic. Not because I needed anything cleaned, but because the attic crawl space held the second envelope, the one Eliza didn't know about. And I was ready for David to see. We spent an hour clearing out old photo albums and boxes of forgotten holiday decorations. He asked about a few trinkets, the porcelain angel his father had brought back from Vienna, a childhood painting that still smelled faintly of tempera and dust. He laughed. He reminisced. And then he opened the shoebox labeled linens. Inside the second envelope hidden between folded table runners, he pulled it out slowly, stared at the handwriting. "To David, only open if something feels wrong." He looked at me, eyes puzzled. Did you write this? I met his gaze. Open it. He sat cross-legged on the attic floor and unfolded the contents. Photos of the hidden pouch, the vials, her logbooks, my journal entries, handwritten copies of the symptoms I'd endured dated and organized. And a letter short, clear, direct: your wife is poisoning me. Slowly, carefully. I have not yet told the police. Because what I want is not just for her to be punished. I want you to see her. And I want you to decide what kind of man you are. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the photos. His hands trembled. Mom. I waited. He shook his head. This isn't real. It can't be. Eliza would never. She would, I said. And she has. For months. But you're still here. If she were poisoning you. She is. I've preserved samples. Had 2 tested. All signs point to digitalis or something near it, and other mixtures I can't identify. She's meticulous. He ran his hand through his hair. No, he said quietly. She loves you. She takes care of you every day. I crouched beside him. David, that's not love. That's control. That's elimination. He covered his face. I let the silence fall. Let him sit in it. Because belief, when cracked open, takes time to die. Later that night, Eliza asked him what we'd been doing in the attic. I was in the next room, but I didn't need to see their faces. I could feel the shift through the walls. He didn't answer right away. And when he did, his voice had changed. Just sorting old things, he said. Getting a clearer picture of things. She paused. What kind of things? Memories, he said. Then he left the room. The next morning, Eliza tried to regain ground. She brought me breakfast again, oatmeal, bananas, honey, just like before, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Thought I'd make you something warm, she said. You've seemed a little distant. I looked down at the bowl, then looked at her. I'll eat it later, I said. No appetite. She stood there a moment frozen, then nodded and left. I watched her go, then scraped the contents into the toilet and flushed it. I didn't need more samples. I had what I needed. Now I needed the stage. That night I set the final trap. I called both of them into the living room after dinner. Said I wanted to talk. Eliza sat across from me, perched on the edge of the couch like a cat ready to leap. David stood by the fireplace, arms folded. I looked at both of them, the son I raised and the woman who had slowly dismantled me under his roof, and then I pulled the 3rd envelope from the table drawer. David has seen this, I said, and now you will too. Eliza's face remained neutral. I slid it toward her. She didn't open it, just stared at it. I know, I said gently. Her jaw twitched. I know about the powders, the vials, the logbooks, the white tin labeled basil. I know you've been experimenting, measuring, watching. Still, she said nothing. David stepped closer, voice tight. Eliza, say something. And that's when her mask broke. She smiled, not with warmth, not even with malice, but with relief. You always were sharper than you let on, Margaret. David stared at her. So you're not denying it. She turned to him calmly. What do you want me to say, David? That your mother isn't unwell? That she hasn't been drifting for months, repeating things, forgetting conversations, blaming me when she misplaced her pills? I laughed once. Quietly. Desperate, I said. But elegant. David was pale now. Eliza. Is it true? She tilted her head. You've read her letters. Do you believe them? I don't know, he whispered. And that was when I gave him the final piece. I walked to the drawer, retrieved the small cooler bag, opened it. Inside 4 vials of food samples, all labeled, all dated, and a final envelope from Renee, the pharmacy tech, with her test results confirming presence of digitoxin-like compounds in 2 of the samples. I handed it to him. He read it, and sat down slowly, hands trembling, mouth open. She tried to kill you. No, I said. She tried to erase me, quietly, slowly. She wanted you all to herself. Eliza's face was unreadable now. No panic. No remorse. Just clarity. She got in the way, she said. She never respected our marriage. She never left. David stood. Leave, he said quietly. Eliza, leave. The sound cracked through the house like thunder. And still she didn't flinch. She stood, looked at me, and said, "You win." Then walked out of the house without a word. The silence after Eliza left wasn't peaceful. It rang, like a bell struck too hard in a stone chapel. David didn't speak. He just stood there holding the test results in one hand and the edge of the fireplace mantel with the other, as if the house might tilt beneath him at any moment. I watched him quietly, feeling no victory in that moment. Just a terrible, aching weight. Because when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it just reveals how deep the wound goes. I should have seen it, David whispered. He was still staring at the door she'd walked through 10 minutes ago. She made you tea every day. She kept saying you were weak, tired. I thought she was helping. She made it easy for you to believe that. I just wanted to believe she cared. I stepped closer and touched his shoulder gently. She cared, I said, but not about me, only about control, power, ownership. He turned then, eyes bloodshot. You think she'll come back? I don't think she ever left David. She just finally stopped pretending. He nodded slowly. What do we do now? That night, David didn't sleep. He sat at the dining table with the envelope open, rereading the letter I had written him. He kept turning the photographs over in his hands as if searching for some missing clue. I returned to my room, but sleep never came for me either. Instead, I lay awake thinking about all the quiet betrayals that don't leave bruises, about the cruelty hidden inside compliments, the slow manipulation hidden in care. I thought of how many times I'd smiled through breakfast knowing it could be the last, and I thought of how long I had been alone in knowing. Until now. The next morning, David called in sick to work. He made coffee bitter too strong and burned the toast. He didn't apologize for it. He didn't look at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do we go to the police?" I sipped the coffee and met his eyes. I want to. But we need more than what we have. We have the test results, your journal, the photos. It'll be our word against hers, and she's been documenting everything too. Carefully. She'll spin it. Say I planted it all. That I was delusional. David gritted his teeth. Then we'll find more. No, I said quietly. You'll stay out of this. What she wanted to isolate me. She almost did. But this is mine to finish. The next few days were quiet. Eliza didn't return. She didn't call, didn't text. David tried to track her down, her sister, her office, her friends, but she'd vanished cleanly like a shadow at sunrise. That more than anything told me she wasn't done. She wasn't running. She was regrouping. Because women like Eliza don't just disappear. They circle. They wait. I spent those days regrounding myself, cooking for David, rearranging the kitchen back to how it had been when we moved in. Little things. I even put out a new tea set, white porcelain floral pattern, delicate as spring, the one I'd packed away when Eliza first arrived. David noticed. You're reclaiming the space, he said. I smiled. Something like that. On the fourth day, I received a letter. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. Typed. Inside just one line. We both know you're not the victim you pretend to be. No signature. But I didn't need one. The paper smelled faintly of lavender oil, Eliza's signature scent. She was watching, still trying to twist the blade. I burned the letter in the sink, watched the edges curl and turn to ash. Let her know I saw her and didn't flinch. That evening, David found me in the backyard. I was sitting on the old wooden bench under the maple tree where I used to read while he played in the garden as a boy. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I ask something?" I nodded. "Did you ever doubt yourself while it was happening all the time? But you kept acting like you were sure." I looked at him. I had to. He sat beside me. "I hate that I didn't see it. I feel like I failed you." "You didn't fail me," I said. "You loved her. That's not a failure. But I let her do this to you. You trusted her. And she used that trust. That's not on you." He looked away, eyes wet. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore." I placed a hand over his. "You're the boy I raised. The man who stood beside me when I needed him most. You're still him. But now you see more." In the days that followed, we began rebuilding. Together. He went through Eliza's computer carefully, respectfully, and found a few encrypted files. Hidden folders. Nothing obvious. We documented it all. Passed it to a lawyer I trusted from years back, Diane's cousin. Quietly, privately. There would be no public scandal. Not yet. But we were building a case. A real one. Then 1 week after she vanished, Eliza returned. Not to the house, but to court. She filed for legal guardianship of me, claimed I was mentally unfit, that I'd been hoarding dangerous substances, that I'd become paranoid and manipulative. David received the papers at the door. He came to me shaking. "She's trying to take your rights." I looked at the papers, then at him. And I smiled. Then it's time. Time for what I met his eyes. To stop playing defense. There's something sacred about a woman reclaiming her voice. Not in public, not on stages or in courts, but in the places where it was first taken from her. The kitchen, the living room, the silence between meals, the pauses in a conversation she was never meant to win. I had been quiet for too long. Now I would make noise. The morning after the court summons arrived, I called Diane. "Can you come over?" I asked. "And bring your cousin, the attorney." She didn't ask why. She said, "Be there by 3." By 5 o'clock, the living room looked like a deposition. David sat on the arm of the couch, white-faced and exhausted. Diane, composed in her slate gray pantsuit, reviewed the documents Eliza had filed. Her cousin William took notes in a leather-bound journal and sipped my tea politely. I stayed quiet while they reviewed everything. The vials, the photographs, the notes, the medical symptoms, the threats. And finally, Eliza's petition to have me declared mentally incapacitated and in need of oversight. It was surgical. She'd used the same traits she'd subtly planted in David's mind for months: forgetfulness, confusion, paranoia, and assembled them like puzzle pieces into a portrait of delusion. And I had to admit, it was brilliant. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her too. William closed the folder and leaned forward. "This petition is smart," he said. "Cold. Calculated. It paints you as unstable in ways that will be difficult to refute unless we dismantle the narrative entirely." Diane looked at me. "You ready to go public with this, Margaret?" I held her gaze. "I don't want spectacle. I want closure. I want her out of my life permanently, legally." William nodded. "Then we start with a declaration, a notarized statement. You'll testify to your experiences, but more than that, we'll preempt her case. File first. Restraining order, emotional abuse, attempted poisoning." David looked up. "But the evidence?" "It's circumstantial, yes. But paired with the test results, it builds a pattern. And if we get character witnesses, people who've observed changes in your behavior since Eliza moved in," Diane cut in, "you've got at least 5. Me included." He looked at me. "But there's one thing we'll need." I nodded. "I know." "Are you ready to confront her in front of witnesses?" I looked out the window. "I've been ready for months." That night, I sat down with David and we wrote the email. Not to Eliza, to her sister Hannah. We asked for a peace meeting, a last chance to settle things amicably for the sake of reputation and family. I wrote it with just enough vagueness and just enough bait. We asked her to join us at the house that Saturday, and to bring Eliza with her. David was nervous. "She might not come," he said. I smiled. "She won't resist. Not if she thinks I'm scared." Saturday arrived cloudy. David tidied the living room obsessively. Diane came early with William and two discreet legal observers notaries, in plain clothes, seated quietly in the corner. Audio devices ready, phones on silent. We left the envelope the final copy on the coffee table. The stage was set, and I took my seat like a woman about to host a dinner party. Eliza let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "This is pathetic." William cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you're welcome to respond on record, but I would advise caution." Diane handed Eliza a printed document, the formal restraining order notarized and filed. Eliza stared at it, then at me. "You think this will hold?" she hissed. "I know it will," I said. She turned to David. "Are you really going to stand there and let her do this to me?" He didn't flinch. "Eliza, I stood by you longer than I should have. But not now." Her voice sharpened. "She's manipulating you. She's always wanted to be the only woman in your life." I stepped forward. "She gave you everything David," Eliza said, ignoring me. "She never let go. Even when we got married, you almost killed her." The words were soft, but they cracked the air like glass. Eliza stopped. For a heartbeat, her face trembled. Then she straightened. "You've all gone mad." She turned to Hannah. "Let's go." Hannah hesitated. "Eliza." I said let's go, but Hannah didn't move. "I'm staying." Eliza stared at her, then at us, then at the table, and finally she laughed. Cold, empty. "You win," she said, and walked out. After she left, the house was so quiet it felt like we were floating in space. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Hannah collapsed into a chair, covering her mouth. "She really did it," she whispered. "She did," I said. "But it's over." Diane leaned over and touched my arm. "You were magnificent." I looked at her, at all of them. No, I was prepared. That night, David sat beside me on the porch. We didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "What happens next I heal?" I said. He nodded, and I added, "And we rebuild." You'd think after a confrontation like that there'd be peace, that the storm, having finally passed, would leave quiet skies and soft winds in its wake. But some storms linger in the bones, and some people like Eliza don't fade. They mutate. They scheme from the shadows. Because for women like her, control isn't a habit. It's a craving, and withdrawal makes them dangerous. The following week was strangely calm. Too calm. David returned to work. Diane checked in regularly. William began the paperwork for a civil case, building slowly, methodically. We weren't rushing to destroy Eliza. That wasn't the goal. The goal was containment. Closure. But she wasn't done. It started with the dog. A neighbor's beagle, usually docile, got violently sick after sniffing through our trash. The vet suspected rat poison. The dog survived. But when David took out the next trash bag, he noticed it had been opened and resealed. Not torn. Cut and taped shut. He brought it inside, pale-faced. "She's coming back," he said. "Not to talk. To sabotage." I examined the bag. The cut was too clean. No raccoon did this. And suddenly I felt it again, that cold hand pressing against the base of my spine. The sense of being watched. Hunted. I called Diane. "Get me security cameras," I said. She didn't ask questions. By that afternoon, motion sensor cameras were installed at the front door, back porch, side path, and garage. Just in time. That night at 2:37 a.m., the front camera pinged. A woman in a hood, slim, deliberate, stepped onto the porch. She didn't knock. She didn't linger. She slid a letter under the door and vanished into the dark. The envelope was pale blue. Inside a single sheet. You can take my husband. You can take your pitiful victory. But you'll never feel safe again. I will always be one breath behind you. No signature. But there was something else. A pressed foxglove flower. My hands didn't shake, but my jaw clenched so hard it ached. We filed a police report immediately. The restraining order was still active, but Eliza was careful never crossing the legal line directly. She hadn't spoken to us, hadn't stepped inside the property. She was playing the long game now. Psychological warfare. Death by erosion. But she'd made a mistake. She thought I was still vulnerable. She didn't realize that I had become the most dangerous version of myself. A woman who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. So I set my final plan in motion. Not revenge, not retribution, extraction. I called William. It's time, I said. Time for what? For the end. The next week I sent a letter. Not to Eliza, to the medical board overseeing the holistic clinic where she volunteered as a wellness consultant. Inside documentation, lab reports, photos, affidavits, a full dossier outlining her experiments in natural treatment, including the substances found in her hidden vials. It wasn't a criminal report. It was something worse for her. A reputational strike, the kind that sticks like tar. And then I made a second call to a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Dr. Marla Green. She ran a domestic abuse survivors group. She also had a podcast one focused on stories no one else would believe. I told her mine. I didn't use names, just the truth. A woman poisoned slowly by the person who brought her tea. A son caught in the web. A quiet rebellion built not on violence, but on memory and proof. She recorded our conversation anonymously, published it 2 weeks later. It went viral within 48 hours. Eliza called David that night. From a blocked number. He let it go to voicemail. Her voice was calm. Cold. I hope you're proud of yourselves. You've ruined everything. I never wanted to hurt her, not really. I just wanted her gone. You don't understand what it's like to watch someone control your marriage, your home, your life. She stopped, paused, then ended with, she started it. David played it for me in the kitchen. I listened once, then again. And finally I said, we've got her. William agreed. With the voicemail, the history, and the restraining order breach, we had grounds for escalation. He filed for a full protective injunction not just for me, but for David too. The court date was set. 2 weeks away. And then, Eliza disappeared. Not metaphorically. She vanished, quit her clinic, moved out of her rental, deleted her social media. Even her sister Hannah stopped hearing from her. It was like she dissolved into air. At first, I felt unsettled. Then I felt relieved. And finally, I understood. She'd run out of moves. When you expose someone who lives in shadows, when you shine enough light, they either burn or vanish. She chose the latter. David and I stood in the garden that afternoon. It was early spring. The first buds were peeking out. The foxglove patch, the one my late husband had once nurtured, had been dug up, roots and all. Burned in a fire pit. Feels symbolic, David said. It is, I replied. It's not just about what grows. It's about what we allow to keep growing. He looked at me. You know, I'll never forgive myself, right? You don't need to. I do. You trusted me, and I let her. You believed in love, I said. That's not weakness. That's hope. He turned to me. And you? What do you believe in now? I thought for a long moment. Then said, I believe in women who outlive their poisoners, and who keep the recipes for healing to themselves. Time has a strange texture after survival. It doesn't move in days or hours, it moves in echoes. Echoes of footsteps that never come. Echoes of cups clinking when no one's pouring tea. Echoes of words that were never said. and ones that can't be unsaid. It had been 3 months since Eliza disappeared, and even though the cameras remained and the locks were changed and the garden was finally ours again, there were mornings I still woke up expecting to taste metal on my tongue, to feel the familiar throb behind my eyes, to wonder if today's tea would be the one that finally tipped the scale. But survival teaches you a new rhythm, and slowly, breath by breath, I was learning how to breathe again. David had changed too. There was a quiet gravity to him now. A stillness that hadn't been there before, not brooding exactly, but aware. He'd always been a kind man, a loving son. But now, he saw things. He heard pauses in my voice, noticed the stiffness in my hands, watched me with a different kind of attentiveness. Not pity, not guilt, just recognition. We'd become co-survivors in a war that had no battlefield, no blood. Just silence and spoons and half-smiles laced with death. And then the letter came. Again. But this time it wasn't dropped at the door in the dead of night. It came through the post. Stamped. Postmarked from New Mexico. No return address. Just a single line of text inside. You won. But you'll never be done. And beneath it another pressed flower. Lily of the valley. Toxic. Fragrant. Beautiful. I didn't tell David. Not right away. Instead, I drove out to the edge of town to the cliff where we used to picnic when he was small before he left for college. Before the house filled with the scent of Eliza's oils, before the kitchen became a chamber of dread. I sat on the hood of my old blue Buick and stared at the horizon, the wind tearing through my scarf, the letter clutched in my gloved hand. And for the first time, I let myself say the words out loud. I was almost murdered, and no one but me knew it. The wind didn't answer, but my chest did. It lifted, just slightly. That night, I burned the letter in the sink, just like the others, but I kept the flower. I pressed it between the pages of my old cookbook, right between a recipe for lavender shortbread and the instructions for sterilizing mason jars. A reminder. Not of fear, but of what I'd survived. The next morning, I told David everything. He didn't speak at first. He just stood by the window looking out at the maple tree now full and green again, a far cry from the brittle limbs of winter. She's watching, he said finally. I know. She won't stop. I don't need her to stop. He turned to me confused. I just need to know that I'm not hers anymore, that I'm not living my life around her. Not every lock, not every breath, not every cup of tea. David sat down heavily. What does that even look like? I smiled faintly. It looks like living. So I started making lists, not of tasks, not of legal strategies or possible evidence, but of things I wanted to do. Real things. I wrote, bake a cake and eat it warm even if it ruins dinner. Paint the hallway yellow. Write to my sister in Vermont and tell her the truth. Walk barefoot in the garden again. Laugh with my son without guilt. Learn to sleep without checking the lock 3 times. Small things. But they were mine. And I did them. One by one. I repainted the hallway in a bright, buttery hue that David called a little aggressive, but which made me smile every time I walked through it. I wrote a 5-page letter to my sister Anne explaining everything. She called me sobbing 2 days later, said she'd always suspected something was wrong, said she was proud of me. I baked a lemon cake, burned the edges, ate it anyway. And one night, just as the sun was setting, I stepped out into the garden barefoot and let the soil kiss my toes. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't triumph, it was something better. Return. But peace is not the absence of threat. It's the ability to breathe even with it nearby. And the next test of that peace came on a Thursday morning. I was alone. David had gone to the store when the phone rang. Blocked number. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something told me I should. I picked up. Silence. Then, a voice. Low. Measured. I didn't want to kill you. My fingers gripped the receiver. Eliza. You were in the way. And so your solution was to poison me. You weren't going to leave. I didn't have to. It was your marriage. You just didn't like that David loved me too. She breathed hard into the line. You think this is over? That I lost? You did. A bitter laugh. No. You just woke up. You think surviving means winning. But every day you remember what I did, that's my victory. And then, she hung up. I stared at the silent phone for a long time. Then I pressed 1. Voicemail. You don't get to define this, I said. You don't live here anymore. Not in this house. Not in this body. Not in my fear. I ended the message, blocked the number, and never heard from her again. 2 weeks later, the protective order was extended indefinitely. Her disappearance had become a ghost story in town. Neighbors whispered. Old friends speculated. But I knew where she was. Not physically, but mentally. Still pacing. Still stewing. Still watching the woman she couldn't destroy live a life that no longer included her. And that, in the end, was justice enough. David came home one afternoon with a surprise. A gift. A journal leather-bound navy blue. I figured if she left you with all those vials and notes and records, he said you should get to write your own. I held it in my hands. It felt right. So I began. The first line I wrote. This is not the story of a woman who was poisoned. This is the story of the woman who healed without apology and learned to laugh again. It started with a whisper at the grocery store. Not a scandal. Not an accusation. Just a quiet moment in the produce aisle near the avocados. A woman, probably mid-40s, hair in a low bun, sleeves rolled past the elbows like she'd just come from planting tomatoes, leaned close to me and said, I heard your voice. I turned. She gave a faint smile. That podcast, she added, the one with the anonymous woman. I stiffened. But she wasn't hostile. Her eyes were soft, red around the edges. I just wanted you to know, she said, I believed you. Then she turned, lifted her bag of potatoes, and disappeared behind a row of soup cans. I stood there for a moment, feeling the blood rush to my ears. Someone had heard me, and more than that, believed me. The next week, Diane called. There's a women's group downtown, she said. Community center. They host stories, healing sessions. It's not therapy. More like witness circles? I was already shaking my head. Diane, they want you to speak. I'm not a speaker. You're a survivor. That's all they care about. I told my story once. Tell it again. Out loud. In the light. I agreed, reluctantly. It was held in a pale blue room that smelled faintly of coffee and lemon-scented hand wipes. The folding chairs were arranged in a crescent, no microphone, no stage, just faces. Some tired, some wary. All women. All different ages. Every one of them with a story tucked just behind their ribs, waiting. I clutched the edge of my notebook and stood. My name is Margaret, I began. Pause. Breathe. And then I used to think you had to see bruises to call something abuse. The air changed. 20 pairs of eyes lifted to meet mine, but I lived through something slower, softer, more polite. A kind of violence that came in teaspoons. A smile, a perfectly arranged dinner plate. I told them everything, not dramatically, not like a courtroom summary, just truthfully, quietly. What it felt like to doubt my own mind, what it felt like to scream in silence while everyone thought I was fine, what it felt like to have someone weaponize care, and then what it felt like to take it all back. When I finished, there was no applause, just a deep, shared silence. Then a woman with short white hair raised her hand and said, I was poisoned too. She smiled faintly, with words. Another spoke next, a woman with a thick accent and scars on her wrist. My sister told everyone I was unstable so she could take our inheritance. One by one they bloomed open, secrets spilled like wildflowers from dry soil. I had thought my story was rare, but it wasn't. It was just one variation in a symphony of unspoken pain. Afterward, they gathered around me, not like fans, like fellow soldiers. One gave me a bracelet handmade beads threaded with a single silver foxglove charm. "I thought you should own it," she said. Another simply hugged me. No words. And for the first time in my life, I felt not alone. That night, I told David everything. He was quiet for a long time listening as I described each woman, each story. When I finished, he leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I used to think this only happened to other people," he said. "You know, the news stories, the documentaries. That kind of abuse felt far away." He looked up at me. "But it was in my house, in my marriage." I took his hand. "You saw it eventually?" "I should have seen it sooner. Maybe," I said. "But maybe you had to see it like this so you'd never miss it again." A few days later, I received an invitation. The women's group wanted to turn my story into a series. No names, no photos. Just the idea of it, how to survive the invisible kind of abuse. They asked me to help write the framework. And something inside me, something I thought had died, said yes. Not for justice, not for vengeance, but because I realized if she almost erased me, she surely had done it to others. And maybe I had found the one way to make her lose for good. We titled the project Steeped in Silence, the subtitle Stories of Women Who Were Almost Erased. It grew faster than we expected. Submissions from around the country, then abroad, letters, emails, voicemails from trembling voices. And slowly it became a mosaic of survivors, of silent fighters, of those who never got to say goodbye to their old selves but finally had someone to hear them. One afternoon, as I sat editing a particularly harrowing entry from a woman in Nova Scotia, David brought me tea. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. I watched every step. I took it, sipped, warm, chamomile, just right. I looked at him. "How long are you going to keep making it for me?" He smiled. "As long as it takes." But here's the thing they don't tell you about healing. It isn't a finish line, it's a rhythm. Some days I still flinch when I smell lavender. Some nights I wake up and check the locks twice. But those days are fewer, and the distance between them is growing. I had almost forgotten about Eliza. Not in the way you forget an old address or a high school friend, but in that gentler, harder way. Like your body forgetting pain, even though your mind remembers how it felt to hurt. It had been a year. 12 months without a phone call, a threat, or a flower pressed into a cruel little note. 12 months of tea that didn't taste like suspicion. 12 months of sleep without waking in sweat. And then, the letter came. Again. But this time, it wasn't from her. It was from the state attorney's office. David brought it in from the mailbox. His expression was unreadable, a look I hadn't seen since the day we confronted Eliza in the living room. "Something happened," he said quietly, handing me the envelope. I sat down, opened it slowly. It was a formal notice. Eliza had been arrested. Not here. Not even in our state. She'd been living under a false name in Arizona, caught attempting to renew a medical credential using forged documents. They ran her prints. Her name flagged under a sealed complaint from our lawyer. Then the rest came crashing down. It turned out she'd been continuing her natural wellness work under the radar, giving consultations, selling detox tinctures. But someone got sick. Very sick. An elderly woman who had been drinking Eliza's homemade anti-inflammation tea daily. Her daughter, a nurse, had the tea tested after her mother began showing signs of liver distress. Inside the tea, digitalis, foxglove. The same poison Eliza had once slipped into my cup. And that sealed her fate. The letter explained that I had been named as a key historical witness. They weren't asking me to testify. Not yet. But they wanted me to submit a formal affidavit, everything I had documented, every test result, every photograph, every timestamp. It would be used as corroborative evidence in the upcoming trial. I stared at the paper for a long time. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. Because I'd always assumed this would be my justice, but it wasn't. It was someone else's. David sat across from me watching. Finally, he said, "Are you going to do it?" "Yes," I said. "Of course." But part of me hesitated, because the thought of dredging it all up again, of reopening those files, reading my own journal entries, seeing the photos I'd printed on my old inkjet printer felt like lighting a match in a house I'd just rebuilt. Still, I did it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents, some faded, some crisp, and slowly organized them into a single narrative. This time, I didn't write it like a victim. I wrote it like a historian, a survivor, a witness. It took 2 days. At the end, I signed the final page, Margaret Green, and beneath it the date. 2 weeks later, I received another letter. Not from the attorney, from the woman whose mother had been poisoned. Her name was Teresa. Her handwriting was small and tight, like she was trying to keep her emotions from spilling onto the page. She wrote, "I want to thank you. Not for what happened to you. I'm so sorry it did, but for what you did after. If you hadn't documented it, if you hadn't spoken up, I wouldn't have known what was wrong with my mom. You saved her life. A stranger saved her life." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried for the first time in months. Not out of pain, but release. That weekend, David and I went to the lake. We hadn't gone since before Eliza. We packed sandwiches, a thermos of lemon water, a blanket. I wore my favorite blue sweater, the one she used to call grandmotherly in that way that wasn't quite a compliment. And as we sat on the grass staring at the soft ripples of the water, David said something I'll never forget. "Mom," he said, "you didn't just survive her. You ended her." I shook my head. "No, she ended herself." He turned to me. "But you gave other people the language to see her for what she was." I didn't reply, because he was right. The trial was set for October. I wasn't required to attend, and I didn't plan to. My voice had already been heard, but the morning of the hearing I woke early, dressed in quiet gray, pinned my hair back, slipped the foxglove charm around my wrist, and sat in my garden, alone. I didn't need a courthouse to mark justice. I had soil between my toes and wind in my hair, and a life that no longer belonged to fear. That was enough. The following week, a headline appeared online: "Unlicensed holistic practitioner, sentenced for reckless endangerment and fraud." It didn't say her name. It didn't say mine. But I didn't need it to. David showed it to me as I poured our tea, peppermint for me, black for him. He held my gaze as I handed him his cup. "She's gone," he said. I smiled. "No," I replied. "I'm here. My name is Margaret Green, and this is the last time I'll ever tell this story. Not because I'm tired of it. Not because it doesn't matter. But because it no longer owns me. For years, my life shrank into a single room, a kitchen table, a porcelain cup, a voice in my ear that told me I was forgetful, fragile, failing. And the worst part, I almost believed it. When someone poisons your body, it's horrifying. But when they poison your reality, you start handing them the cup yourself. That's what Eliza did. Slowly, skillfully, beautifully. But cruelty dressed as care is still cruelty. And survival in the end isn't about strength. It's about choosing every single day to see yourself as real, to trust your memory, to guard your truth. Even when no one else does. Especially then. It's been 15 months since the last time I saw her face. The restraining order stands. The trial is over. She was sentenced, fined, banned from medical practice. She has vanished from our lives like smoke. but she'll never vanish from my story. Because women like me, women who have been erased, rewritten, gaslit, slowly disassembled, we carry something no prison can hold witness. And we don't forget. Every week I still go to the women's group. Sometimes I speak, sometimes I listen. Sometimes I just sit in the back and pass out tissues when someone starts to cry mid-sentence. There's a new member, Clara, early 30s, soft-spoken, skittish around loud noises. She told us last week that her boyfriend made her feel lucky to be tolerated. We all looked at each other and nodded. We'd heard that before in different words, different rooms, different cups of tea. And afterward, she came up to me, asked how I stopped being afraid. I told her the truth, I didn't. I just stopped letting fear make my decisions. David and I are closer now than we've ever been. He still brings me tea, still asks before adding sugar, still walks beside me when we go out, glancing sideways every now and then as if to make sure I'm still breathing freely. And I am. For the first time in a long time, I am. I still keep the foxglove charm on my nightstand, not out of sentiment, but as a vow. A reminder that beauty can kill, but it can also warn, if you learn how to read the signs. A few weeks ago, I went into the attic, found an old box of home videos I'd forgotten about or maybe avoided. One of them was David as a teenager baking cookies with me in the old kitchen. You can hear us laughing, arguing over whether cinnamon belongs in chocolate chip batter. I watched it alone, crying the whole time, not from grief, from joy. Because I remembered who I was before the poisoning began, and even better, I could feel her returning. One small piece at a time. To the women watching this, maybe no one ever saw your bruises. Maybe they weren't on your skin. Maybe they were in your silence, your hesitation. The way you started second-guessing everything, from the way you set the table to the way you remembered a conversation. I see you. Because I was you. And I want to say, with every ounce of clarity I have now, you're not crazy. You were conditioned to believe someone else's comfort mattered more than your instincts. You were trained to keep peace in a war you never declared. But you get to end it. You get to walk away. Even if your hands shake. Even if you do it alone. Even if no one claps. So this is how my story ends. Not with handcuffs. Not with revenge. But with a warm cup of tea made by someone who loves me, in a house I reclaimed, in a body I trust again. I survived. And more than that, I remembered how to live. If this story reached you, if something inside you stirred while you listened, then maybe it's your turn to speak now. In the comments, in a letter, in a whisper to a friend. However you choose, don't let silence win. Because survival isn't just endurance. It's voice, it's breath, it's truth. Thank you for listening.